Hi, I'm Dr. Blunt. This week's video is going to ask whether global poverty is a crime against humanity. Now I know what you're thinking, Dr. Blunt has early onset dementia because he did this last week. Well, last week I talked about why we can't exclude global poverty. In this video, I'm going to make the argument as to why we should include it, or at least make the argument that it's similar enough to noted crimes against humanity. So let's jump in. International law lists 10 specific types of crimes against humanity. Things like murder, extermination, persecution, but we shouldn't get too caught up on that list. Just because something isn't specifically enumerated there doesn't mean that it's not a crime against humanity. When people were conceptualizing crimes against humanity after the Second World War, they realized this was an evolving concept. It was emergent. It needed to be open to reinterpretation. Now, why? Human beings are kind of awful. We find new and disgusting ways of making other people's lives miserable. So our idea of a crime against humanity needs to be expansive. That's why there's the 11th category. The 11th category covers other inhumane acts of a similar character intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury to body or to mental or physical health. What's really interesting about this 11th category is that it lets us make the argument that global poverty is a crime against humanity because it shares specific relevant characteristics with other already enumerated crimes. Now in this video, I'm going to look at two of these crimes. The first is slavery, and the second is apartheid. Now why these crimes specifically? Well, the answer is that they're kind of unique compared to the other crimes, insofar as they try to create what we might call a stable system of oppression. So unlike, say, mass murder, which is over in a relatively short period of time, and that's to say nothing that it's not bad, like mass murder is obviously terribly bad, it's brief. Slavery and apartheid are intergenerational projects. They're being set up as a permanent part of what John Rawls would call the basic structure of society. Now, I find these structural injustices really interesting because whenever I'm reading about slavery or apartheid, I think to myself, well, a lot of people who were situated within these systems didn't see anything wrong with them. You could go into the antebellum South and ask someone, are you a good person? And they'll say, yeah. Do you believe in slavery? And they'll say, yeah, of course, it's natural. Because it's the system that they exist in. It colors their entire vision of the world. And I think to myself, what's like that now? What's the slavery of the 21st century? And you know what? I think there's a strong case that it's global poverty. But the question that we need to answer is, what do slavery, apartheid, and global poverty have in common? And the answer is domination. Domination is a very widespread term in political philosophy. You might be associating it with the work of Michel Foucault, who did a lot of work around domination and social theory, but that's not how I use it. I'm a Republican. A Republican like this. Not a Republican like this. Republicanism is a very long-standing tradition in political philosophy. It goes back to ancient Rome with roots in classical Greece. But recently it's had a huge revival thanks to the work of the historian Quentin Skinner, who did a lot of excavation on the conception of liberty in England in the 17th and 16th centuries, as well as Philip Pettit, who translated these ideas into contemporary political philosophy. Now, the core idea that they look at is what it means to be free. And the opposite, the antithesis of freedom, is domination. And the reason why I like this idea of domination is that it is conceptually very clear. I'm not ragging on continentalists. I just like having a clear conception of when we're doing political philosophy. Otherwise, it turns into a weird sort of mushy, semi-poetic, kind of nonsense word salad. I'm looking at you, Jacques Derrida, who is dead. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be mean to dead people. Anyway, back to the real topic. So what do Republicans mean when they say domination? Well, domination refers to social relationships or institutions in which one agent possesses the power to arbitrarily interfere in the choices of another dependent agent, or a social institution in which a dependent agent cannot contest their role within it. Now, that's a lot of information, and I really do want to do a series on republicanism, but let's just do a light unpack now so that we understand it. Domination has 4 necessary conditions. Condition 1 is super simple. It's a social relationship or institution. Domination doesn't exist between human beings and rocks or human beings and plants. Now, there might be a debate as to whether you can dominate a non-human animal or an artificial intelligence, but I'm sorry, folks, that is a big can of worms that I'm not opening up in this particular video. Suffice it to say, domination is social. Domination is fundamentally about power and the distribution of power within these relationships and institutions. Domination requires an asymmetric distribution of power. Someone has more power than someone else. This division of power is not trivial, right? The asymmetry has to be sufficient to produce dependence. Now, what does dependence mean? When we talk about domination, people often think that the dependent agent has no power, right? That their agency has been totally crushed. They've been destroyed as a person. Now, this isn't true. Dependent subjects, oppressed people, still are people. They're making choices under difficult constraints, but they can still make choices. So how do we understand dependency? The best explanation I can think of comes from Frank Lovett. He says that dependency exists when the exit costs, the costs of leaving a relationship or an institution, are so high as to be unreasonable. So we might be able to get out, but the price we pay for leaving is so high that most people will not accept it. The final condition is perhaps the most important. This power, this asymmetry of power, is arbitrary. Arbitrary insofar as the more powerful agent can exercise their power at will. The weaker agent cannot object, they cannot check, they cannot veto. They are simply subjected to this power. And you should note, it doesn't mean that the dominating agent actually needs to use their power. It's simply the capacity to act arbitrarily in the choices of another agent. In the institutional setting, it means that the weaker agent is unable to contest their role. Their status within the social institution is assigned to them arbitrarily. And this is why I like this idea of domination, right? It is simple, social, an asymmetry of power, sufficient to produce dependence, and it is arbitrary. If you can check those 4 boxes, you can say that something is dominating. Why should we care about domination? Well, if you're like me, you might ascribe to an idea of minimal autonomy, that human beings are creatures who should be able to choose their conception of a good life, all things being equal. We have this capacity to choose, we have this capacity to envisage what we want, and we should be able to pursue it, so long as we're respecting other people's ability to do the same. Human beings have rights, as Nozick says, and there are certain things that the state or other institutions can't do without violating those rights. Domination necessarily violates those rights because it rejects autonomy. If you are subjected to the arbitrary power of another agent or an institution, then you do not have control over your ability to formulate and pursue a conception of the good life. So we can say that apartheid and slavery are bad because they have this deeply entrenched notion of domination running through them. But does global poverty? Well, let's make the case. Slavery is often held up as a paradigmatic case of domination. If you read the Republican literature, it is everywhere. Because a master, a slave owner, has the ability to interfere in any of the choices available to their slave. Let's say you're a slave. You think, okay, I'm going to go to the marketplace to buy some apples. You have to check with your master first. And they might say, fine, whatever. They might say, no, you have to clean the toilet. They might say, yeah, you can go to the market, but get oranges. They're better. Any choice you make is subject to the approval of your master. You are an example of domination. You can't get away from it. It is intrinsic in the relationship. A slave is dominated because they are forever subjected to the capacity of another person to interfere in their choices. Now, is poverty like this? Well, you might agree with Cecile Laborde, who says that poverty makes people vulnerable to domination. If you are a severely poor person, you are much more likely to, say, sell yourself into slavery back in the day when slavery existed, or become an indentured servant, or something like this. But that's not the same as saying that poverty is dominating. It might just produce vulnerability. Now, I agree with this. I think that people who live in poverty are more vulnerable to various forms of domination, but I think that poverty is also the product of dominating social institutions. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's do a day in the life. Let's say you live in the global south and you have managed to get a job in a sweatshop factory. And this is how you avoid being destitute. You really don't have any other reasonable choice. You have to get this job. Now, you wake up in the morning in a dormitory that's owned by the company that you're working for. You share your room with several other people. It is crowded. It's probably a bit smelly, but these are your friends. These are your colleagues. You get along with them. But now you have to go to work, which is probably just beside your dorm. Your workplace is crowded. It is full of people making garments. It is loud. All these machines are going, and it is dangerous. There is no health and safety. It is just machines going at full speed, and there are often really tragic incidences within sweatshop factories. If you want a real-world example of this, look at the 2012 Dhaka factory fire in Bangladesh, where 117 people were killed and 200 were injured because of faulty wiring in a garment factory. This is a tragedy that's not uncommon in the developing world. It just doesn't make news in the global north because the news doesn't really care about poor people. Now I'd say you're like, oh, this isn't very good. I'm going to complain to my boss. What happens? You get fired, right? If you say, I don't want to do this, or this is dangerous, or the wiring's faulty, they're probably just going to say, well, get out then. Someone else will take your job. Out you go. Join the ranks of the starving. Join the ranks of people who cannot feed their families. You don't really have a choice to leave. Well, you say, okay, maybe I'll start a union. I'll be like the Starbucks people in the United States, and I'm going to unionize to get a better wage and better working conditions. Well, this is a great way to wind up either in hospital or dead in a ditch in the global south because they don't really take kindly to union organizers. You are caught. Now, this is no accident, right? This is a deliberate part of the neoliberal international system. It is a feature, not a bug. It has clawed back regulation over things like workplace, over things like social programs. It has glorified the market, but in reality, it has concentrated power in the hands of private agents. And the private agents shape the system in which people who live in the global south, who work in these sweatshops, have no choice but to comply. They are like slaves insofar as they are subjected to arbitrary power in their workplace, but they're also like slaves insofar as they cannot contest their position within the overall social system, not without engaging in resistance or revolution. So we can say that people living in wage slave conditions are in conditions similar to slavery because both are dominated. But what about apartheid? The crime of apartheid highlights the structural elements of domination in a perhaps clearer way. So what is apartheid? You might not be familiar. Well, the Apartheid Convention defines it as similar policies or practices as the racial discrimination and segregation policies found in Southern Africa. These disappeared in 1994, at least formally, when apartheid came to an end thanks to Nelson Mandela and de Klerk negotiating sort of a new South African constitutional settlement. But the idea of apartheid still exists in international law as a general concept. It is not particular. So one of the things that people often associate with apartheid is the racial majority in South Africa being interactionally oppressed, say by the police, being prevented from entering into sort of certain restaurants or attending certain universities. And this is true. There is this arbitrary power, but I'm going to take a step back from that because I'm more interested in the background structure. One of the disagreements that I have with Frank Lovett is over whether we could have an idealized apartheid in which there would not be domination. Now, Lovett thinks that if there was the rule of law, if rules were impartially enforced and publicly known, then it wouldn't be dominating. It would be unjust for other reasons. He is not an apartheid apologist, but it would not be dominating. But I disagree, because I think that domination doesn't require this interactional form of arbitrary power. It can assign you a role that you cannot contest. So let's say we have this idealized apartheid that says the majority of people, because they are black, cannot go to university. Someone who is part of the majority decides to apply, and then they are turned back. Now, is this person dominated? I would say yes, because their status has been arbitrarily assigned in a way that they cannot contest. They cannot say, oh, actually, this is a deeply flawed system. I would rather not be in it. Is there a sort of formal path that I can go through in order to help overturn this apartheid system? No, there's not. Now, they haven't been subjected to interactional arbitrary power. The person who rejected their application is just following the rules. They don't set the rules. But it does seem to be arbitrary, simply because you cannot have any choice over your minimal autonomy. This is a form of structural domination based on racism. Now, is global poverty like this? Now, certainly there is a racialized dimension to poverty. You are much more likely to be living in poverty if you aren't, well, white. But I don't think that it's racialized in the same way as apartheid. Now, what it is done, or what it is like, is structurally, it is like apartheid. Because people who live in severe poverty, much like the person who is arbitrarily interfered with in their university admissions, they don't get a choice. They can't contest the neoliberal world order. It is being set against them. There are no formal avenues in which to create a fair distribution. You might say, well, they could go to Davos. Well, factory workers don't go to Davos. They could go to the United Nations. Oftentimes, the governments that control these people are not democratically accountable. They are often highly corrupt, and they are part of the very system that is producing the domination. So there doesn't seem to be a reasonable way in which these people can challenge their status within the system. It is like apartheid insofar as you have a large number of people who have been subjected to institutional discrimination and they cannot contest it. They are being oppressed in the same way. Okay, so what can we say? We can say that global poverty is like slavery and it's like apartheid. Now, that's not to say that anyone's going to be dragged in front of the International Criminal Court over poverty. I'm not an international lawyer. I'm just a political philosopher. But I can say that this structural similarity is driven by extreme domination. Now, I think this authorizes resistance because there's no other ordinary way to overturn them. If you think that people were entitled to resist slavery, if you think they were entitled to resist apartheid, then you have to think that they are legitimately able to resist the causes of poverty. Now, what this resistance looks like is the subject of the second part of my book, and also the second part of this video series. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care.